Hey, it's Patrick Oancia, and I'm the founder and co-developer of the Baseworks method. The Baseworks method at its core is a movement conditioning approach, and a part of what's inspired the development has come from realizations that I've had about the outcome to commitment to practice and the effect that that has had on perception and quality of life. The Baseworks Transmission conversations are exploring both concrete and abstract realizations that emerge out of the commitment to any kind of practice or pursuit to achieve life goals. And the aim is to find a common vocabulary to help better describe these experiences. Ryan co-founded GMB Fitness with partners Andy Fossett and Jarlo Ilano and acts as the head coach and program director of the method. Since 2010, GMB facilitated the delivery of their programming to over 100,000 students in 100 countries. And among the thousands who benefited from their programming, they've trained Olympians, world-class martial artists, and FBI hostage rescue teams at Quantico. Ryan also holds black belts in Kendo and Judo and Shorinji Kempo, and he's also a purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It comes from a long background as a competitive gymnast as well from his younger years. Ryan has devoted his life to coaching others in strength and movement, but always lets his philosophy of training for a healthy life lead the way. He's married with 2 children, and he's lived in Japan for over 25 years. I first came across GMB Fitness in 2014 when I was researching alternative movement practices to recommend to some of our students in Tokyo as a complementary practice alongside of the work that they did with us. At that time, I had no idea Ryan was a longtime expat, and I really only became aware of Ryan's background a couple of years later when we connected on Facebook. As we started interacting via DMs on both Facebook and on Instagram, I got to learn more about Ryan's extensive background in martial arts in Japan. This electronic connection sustained itself right through to this episode where we actually got a chance to talk real time. And what this revealed will likely keep the conversation and friendship going for a long time to come. In this transmission conversation, we talk about Ryan's immersion into gymnastics in Wichita, Kansas from a very young age, right through to decades as a devoted martial artist and expat in Japan. Ryan had an uncommon and valuable experience of being invited to live with his Kendo teacher as an Uchideshi in Niigata, Japan, and he was the first foreigner to be awarded with a black belt from that prestigious dojo. Ryan's immersion into Japanese culture was shaped by these and other experiences that we dig into throughout our talk. We also chat about the conception of GMB Fitness. We talk about GMB being a community-focused experience and how GMB's mission is to empower anyone at any level of health to, say, utilize what they get from the method programming across different practical and strategic movement scenarios. There's quite a bit that we talk about that confirmed my ongoing assumptions about our mutual trajectories in practice and in other endeavors, and this is what led me to invite him to be a part of the transmission conversations. And I'm sure that many of you tuning in will also discover some correlations and insights about the cultivation of practice and how it interconnects with so many things that go on in life. And on the last note, there's a lot of reference to Japan and Japanese culture which may not make that much sense at first, but don't worry, you can find explanations to everything in the show notes. Ryan, thank you very much for taking the time to come on to be a part of the Baseworks Transmission conversations.
Well, thank you so much for having me. As we were talking about earlier, it's about time that we chat. You know, how we've been in Japan for so long and yet have never met in person.
Yeah. It blows me away. And sir, am I speaking to you in Kansai right now?
Yes, that's correct. I'm in Osaka. In Toyonaka actually is where I live, but yes, here in Osaka, yes.
Right. And just so that I can recap from what I understood before, how many years have you been in Japan?
Total, I would say about 28 so far. Yeah. So 20. I want to say, for sure 25 in Osaka, more like 26, but the majority of my time here in Osaka. Yes.
So prior to that was Niigata.
That's correct. Yes. Yep. I was there for a few years for university. Yes.
Right. So the initial trip to Japan was on an exchange program through college.
Yeah. Actually, my very first trip to Japan was here in Kansai. I came over for just a very quick couple month visit, did a homestay and did that in order to study martial arts. And then I went back and said, I have to go back to Japan. And then I came over for student exchange student university in Niigata. That's correct. Yes.
Niigata-shi?
Actually, it's outside of Niigata-shi. So it was in a place called Nakajo-machi, which the closest city is Shibata City.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And so, and so the university college, I guess, I wouldn't call it there because it was a branch of the university, was actually in Nakajo-machi. Yes.
How did you like the life in I won't diverge too much, but how did you like the life in Niigata as opposed to the life in Kansai? I mean, they have very unique qualities, both places. So
very much, yes. And I absolutely loved Niigata. Of course, Osaka, I enjoy it, just as much in a different way. And so, I'm originally from Wichita, Kansas. And so I'm a country boy, and so me being in Niigata was quite familiar in the sense that, the openness, the friendliness of people, if you will, whereas, Kansai is just crazy. So,
I mean, if you compare Kansai and Kanto, then, definitely Kansai people are much friendlier and much more open than people in Kanto, but I understand what you mean about the hospitality in Niigata, in Niigata as well. It's definitely unique. And, Japan's such an weird, interesting place. But I mean, again, you bring down Kansai too, and if you're in Osaka as opposed to Kyoto, it's a very different. I'll say because the Kyoto, it's the total tatemae concept,
yes,
which is
absolutely.
But it's fantastic. It's very diplomatic, but I mean, at the same time, that saying, I forgot. Maybe you know what it is in Japanese. I'm always forgetting it. The one where people they invite you over to their house, and then after
3 times, yes. Yeah.
What was it? Sorry.
Yeah, and so it's they'll invite you over, but the thing is they don't actually really want you to come, but they're being polite, and so you have to say, "Oh no, thank you," and then they ask again, and no thank you. But if they actually really want you to be there, they'll ask you 3 times, and the third time means actually, okay, yes. So it's a weird thing, right? But
I also heard something was like when they offer you ochazuke, you've got to go or something like. Or was there ochazuke or is it wagashi? Like, would they offer you one of those two things?
Yeah, I apologize. I don't know. Yeah, that's a new one for me. That's cool. Yeah, it would surprise me. Yeah,
maybe I misunderstood. And for those of you listening out there, ochazuke and ochazuke would be described as a kind of a tea with rice in it. I guess that would be the easiest way. Just savory, and then wagashi would be a sweet. So you would maybe be offered wagashi in the context of maybe having tea at somebody's place, or somebody may bring out wagashi after dinner. But either way, I heard something like when somebody says, "Oh, would you like some wagashi or ochazuke?" It means like, get the fuck out.
Right? It's time for you to leave, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
It's a very, very unique and interesting experience living in Japan, and such a precious one. I think that you'd probably agree that the culture is just so rich and diverse, and there's so much detail, and as we're going to dig in shortly here in relation to martial arts, I mean, and all the associated traditions or disciplines that people are practicing there, and the level that people commit themselves to those things, it's just like, it's very unique. It's something that that could be seen in other parts of the world, but it has definitely its own flavor. And maybe I'd like to sort of dig in on that. So I really want to talk about martial arts with you, because I know that that's something that you've committed a lot of time to in interdisciplinary practice of martial arts. And but I'd like to, before we get into that, I'd like to just ask, because I had Yuval Ilano, on the last transmission, and we talked a lot about his experience with gymnastics. Now, I know that you started as a gymnast, right? That was your first. That was your first skill. That was your first story, really, wasn't it?
Yes.
So, I mean, and I'd like to talk a little bit about that. So, like, why gymnastics, and at what age, and for how long?
Yeah, great. So at quite a young age, I was in elementary school, and I don't want to say this incorrectly, but I want to say I was either in the 3rd or the 4th year of elementary school. And I had a very influential physical education teacher, PE teacher. His name is Mark Folger. And he just made things fun. And he's actually a gymnastics coach. And so kind of recruited me, if you will. And he said, hey, I'm a gymnastics coach. You got to come and try it. And I did. And I just fell in love with it. And what I really loved about it was, to be honest, like the freedom of just expressing. I didn't really realize it at the time, but the freedom of being able to express my body in different ways and individually. I think that really, really pulled me. I had played team sports before and things like that, but I just do things better by myself. I know that now. And so at the time, he really helped me to really, really bring that out of me. He was my coach all the way until I was 18 years old. And it's when I stopped doing gymnastics. I actually injured my knee when I was doing Aikido. And so when I was in high school. But, going back to gymnastics, I absolutely loved the practice of it. Competition, whatever. Okay. I've never really been like, yay, let's go compete. But the actual practice and doing the work and just being able to see what I could do with my body just always interests me, and it still does. And it's why I do what I do today. But Mark just played such an, influential role in my life as a coach, a fabulous coach as well, 2-time U.S. Coach of the Year in the United States. And I was just really lucky to have him as my coach. Yeah.
I mean, why Wichita for gymnastics? Was it specifically a hub for gymnastics was this in the 90s or?
Yes. So, okay. Well, actually in the 80s, 80s. Yeah. And so, Wichita, there was what's called the Wichita Gymnastics Club, which was kind of the place if you wanted to go to for gymnastics around the area. And eventually Mark, I started there because he was a coach there, but he split off and he started his own place called Folger's Gymnastics. Mark Folger. But as far as gymnastics, though, during that time, the Midwest was quite strong in terms of gymnastics. If you're looking at especially Oklahoma University was one of the top universities in that area for gymnastics. And so he actually graduated from Oklahoma, and he was an alternate on the Olympic team. And so, actually his roommate was Bart Connor, who was actually in the Olympics. I believe it was the 1984 Olympics. And that's kind of when there was a little bit of a boom in gymnastics. And so because that was in the United States, it was held in Los Angeles, and the U.S. team won. And so, Tim Daggett, Bart Connor, and all these guys becoming famous, and then other people like, hey, I want to do gymnastics. So it was a cool time to be able to do that. But yeah, I wouldn't say necessarily, Kansas is a hub for gymnastics, but it was a lot of fun. I just will say that. And we had a lot of opportunities to travel to a lot of different places. Competed a lot throughout my time in gymnastics, especially in Oklahoma, Texas, Nebraska, especially, Colorado, and throughout the Midwest. And it was fun, had the opportunity to go to junior nationals and stuff like that. So it was fun. Yeah.
How many years in total? Sorry.
So goodness, let's see. So if I started in, let's say, 3rd or 4th grade all the way up until I was a senior in high school. So quite a few years.
What were your forms in gymnastics? What were you focusing on?
So all around. I was an all-arounder. Okay. And so I would compete in everything. But my specialty, if you will, what I felt the most comfortable in was pommel horse and the still rings. So those were my two favorite things. Did not like the horizontal bar. I did it, of course, because I was an all-arounder, but I just didn't enjoy it very much. But pommel horse, especially, I absolutely loved. And still rings. And I think that's another reason why I still love working out on the gymnastic rings. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting how that transformed from a, very gymnastics centric thing to like super
to what it is
all
now,
around, body weight specific fitness,
exactly,
functional,
right?
blah, blah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
But super cool in a way that it's been so popular, the muscle up being the
oh my goodness,
culprit. Yeah, if you want to call it that.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, very cool that it sort of sustained itself that way. And I mean, it's obviously, it's actually pretty easy just to throw a set of rings up anywhere and do your thing. I mean, and that's it's such a versatile tool to be able to use in engaging that, a whole body kind of activity,
Absolutely.
if you relating to, agility and core strength and coordination. And so the gymnastics, how did that translate essentially from all those years into martial arts? What transitioned you? So that was the next thing, martial arts first.
It was. Okay. It was. And I was trying to think, because I knew we were going to be talking about this. And I actually haven't talked this deep about what I've done throughout the years, which is kind of fun for me, kind of scary. But I remember watching, and this, I can't believe I'm saying this. I'm almost embarrassed now to say it, but watching a Steven Seagal movie, the very first movie that I think is like Above the Law. And I was like, wow, that looks pretty cool. I was still pretty young. And because I knew I wanted to do some sort of martial art. And Wichita, Kansas was not the mecca of martial arts. I'll just say that. There wasn't a whole lot to choose from. But I just remember seeing the Steven Seagal movie. And then I looked in the yellow pages because that's all they had back then. And there was a single Aikido place. And I was like, wow, I'll go check it out. I had my dad take me. And it just turned out that the instructor, he's originally from Kansas, but he lived in Tokyo for like over 25 years, worked for Nippon Steel as an interpreter there, and moved back to Wichita because his father became ill and he needed to take care of his father. And, fluent in Japanese. At the time, he was a 5th degree black belt in Aikido, Michael Sheon. And another pivotal turning point in my life, I went and just fell in love with it. And to me, of course, it wasn't easy, but it felt familiar thanks to my gymnastics. So when we're looking at spatial awareness, when we're looking at being able to actually use your body in different ranges of motion and being comfortable with your body, I was pretty set thanks to gymnastics. And so I would go to my gymnastics practice, and then after I would go to Aikido practice. And so I was doing both. And I just loved it. And I kept doing it. And I did that while I was in Wichita. And, Sheon Sensei said, hey, if you really want to know more about Aikido, he said, I think you should go to Japan. And I got it in my head that I'm going to Japan. And that's where things started. And so it was Aikido, but when I graduated from high school, I didn't have the opportunity to basically go to other universities because I tore my knee, blew my knee out. And so I ended up going to Kansas State University, a state school. Hated it, just did not enjoy it. But I went because, you got to go to college, right? Of course. That's what people would say. So I went. But
this was just a college. It wasn't on a scholarship for gymnastics or anything?
Wasn't on a scholarship or anything, no, because I lost, all my opportunity to be able to do that. And so basically gymnastics was done.
So because of the knee injury?
Yes. Okay. And so I actually had surgery on my knee and I had this huge knee brace, and I started university at Kansas State University in this knee brace. And I had to go through rehabilitation at the university for the first 6 months when I was there. And when I was there, there was a judo group. There was an Aikido group that I was looking into, of course. I did a little bit with them, but their style was a little different than what I was used to. And there was a lot of, what's a nice way to say it, politics involved in their group that I was like, I don't want to be involved with. And there was a judo group though. And I was like, cool, check out judo. So I actually did a little bit of judo there. And the thing about that though was in Aikido, I was always really interested in the sword part of it. So, the forms and things that they had really interested me. And I had always wanted to do Kendo, but there's no place I could do Kendo. So anyway, jump forward. 2 years. They finally had the very first Japanese class at Kansas State University. They offered this Japanese class, and my instructor, Mizuno Sensei, she's just lovely. And I fell in love with Japanese language, and she said, hey, she kind of took me under her wing. And she said, and her husband, who was actually an engineering instructor at Kansas State University, was a very high level karateka. So he did karate, and he's like, you have to do karate. And I was like, I don't want to do karate. I was like, I want to do Aikido, or, I want to do Kendo and stuff. So Mizuno Sensei is originally from Osaka, here in Osaka. And so she said, would you like to do a homestay with my parents in Osaka? I was like, yes, absolutely. And that was my first time going to, or I should say coming to Osaka. And when I came, I had the opportunity to train Aikido with fabulous guy here. And I was here for 2 months, and I did that. And didn't do Kendo at the time because it was just for Aikido, but I went back. And from that day on, I was like, I want to go to university in Japan. So the martial arts side of it, I was able to continue with that. And so that was what really, really brought me to Japan. And at Kansas State University, they didn't have an exchange program. So what I actually did was applied through a different university, Southern Illinois, Carbondale, and actually got the opportunity scholarship to go to Niigata. And so went to Niigata. Yeah. And so I was only supposed to go for 1 semester, but man, yeah, I'm just completely going off now. I hope that's okay. But
no, that's fine. Yeah.
Yeah. So I came to Japan. I was in Niigata, and the first thing was, hey, is there Kendo? And they're like, yeah, not at the university, but it's quite famous, if you will, in this area. You should go check it out. And I did. And I went to the first practice, and I sat there in Seiza because they took me, and I was actually late, and they had already started. And, I had this thing in my head where, oh my goodness, I have to give a good impression and, sit here and just, wait and show them that I can do it. And I remember the instructor, Ukisu Sensei, coming over and said, yeah, just go ahead and sit, relax and stuff. And I thought he was testing me. So I didn't, of course, it's just this image of a foreigner thinking it has to be this way. And that led to me not only joining that group, but me actually moving in to Ukisu Sensei's home to be an Uchideshi, a live-in student. And to this day, he's my Japanese father. And so almost every week, we communicate on the phone. And his family really took me in. And his son is very high-ranking instructor now in Iaido. And he lives in Nagoya, and we're the same age. And so it's just pretty cool how that all happened. And
so that immersion, that was like not only a full immersion to what you're interested in doing, but a full immersion to the Japanese
language and culture. And yes. And thanks to that, I really, people are like, wow, you really fell into that. I don't believe in luck. I believe that things happen if you actually not just search, but purposely put yourself in a position to be open to those opportunities. And that's what it was. And yes, the culture, the language, now being able to understand multiple dialects. And I was the only exchange student in Niigata that actually did anything outside of the university, which I thought was wild. I was like, why would you not want to go out into the community and try and use the language that you're learning in class and experience things? And yeah, I just dove in head first like I do with everything. And I spoke no English. I was like, I'm not here to do, and I wasn't a dick about it. Of course, it was just that the people around me couldn't speak English because I was going to these Kendo practices and at first I could understand zero of what they were saying because the dialect is so heavy there. but my instructor purposely spoke standard Japanese for me so that I could understand. And he would take me on the weekends. There was a special group with the Jietai, so the Japanese Self-Defense Force. And so I got to go train, and we trained Kendo with them. It's very different style because they would throw each other on the ground and continue to hit. And then we would go and train in Niigata with the police, and they tore the crap out of me. It was great. And I also did judo at the same time. So I also joined the judo club to do that because I'm weird like that, right? But yeah. It was exciting.
So the immersion thing. So that was what, 90s or 80s?
Excuse me. That was in the 90s, and so
early 90s.
So so early 90s, and so it's 93, 92, 93
so in Niigata, right?
In Niigata, that's correct.
So
yes.
My first trip to Niigata was in 1989 to Nagaoka.
Oh wow, cool!
And you're talking about immersion. I went into a public bath, and it was still konnyoku.
Yes, I was just going to ask you that, right?
So and I walked in as a foreigner with my clothes on, and there was women and children, everybody naked, and I was like, oh my God, what's going on here? And
I remember that too. Yeah.
Which just does not exist anymore in Japan. Really, very few places you would have that experience of walking into a public, not a hot spring, but a public bath, and be washing yourself stark naked with all people you don't know. Which is one of the charming things about the culture. But as you mentioned, so that Niigata Ben, trying to sort of get your head around that dialogue, understanding.
It's crazy.
And I totally understood. So your teacher was empathetic in that way and spoke standard Japanese.
Yes, and still does to me, and it's fabulous. And I remember there was one instructor that was there. To this day, I still don't know what he's saying. I mean, because apparently his dialect of Niigata Ben is Nakajo Ben, which is it just blew me away all the time. I was just like, is that Japanese? Anyway, it was fun. And so, but yeah, there's little things like I remember. Yeah, it's just bringing back so many memories. But basically, I did martial arts, but I think that, I remember getting my black belt in Kendo and Iaido. And the big joke, though, was that because you're in Niigata, you might have a black belt in martial arts, but you probably are a higher black belt in drinking. And that culture, to me, it was crazy. Like the amount that people would drink.
Did you indulge in it?
Yeah, it was. Yes, I did, because that was just what it was. And we would go to Kendo practice, and afterwards, everyone would go drink, and that was just how it was. And you'd wake up in the morning and
go back and
here's
practice.
A story. This is crazy. This is the craziest thing I think I've ever experienced. Was Kangeko. So in the winter, the practice. And it's freezing, and they don't use, of course, heaters or anything.
Freezing in the dojo.
This is ridiculous, But I remember going out on January 31st. Well, we had practice on January 31st. We practice every day. 31st, and his son, I remember his son actually was going to a different university. He was in Nagoya at the time, but he came back for New Year's. We practiced together. We went out drinking to the shrine, and I remember we got pretty drunk. Woke up the next morning because we had the first practice of the year, and I remember it was in Shibatashi. I remember this, and there was with other dojos and things like that. Everybody's still drunk, right? I remember doing Kendo and multiple people, this is nasty, throwing up in their men. It was the most horrid thing I had ever experienced, because I was just like, I just blew me away. That was just the one thing where I was just like, I can't believe it. But that was just that culture, It was crazy, man. It was crazy.
I mean, drunken the drunken integration with discipline and skill, whatever it is in Japan, is just such wild, an integrated part. Like the work hard and then go out and get shit faced and bond and then vomit on each other,
Yeah, right. Yeah. It's, I mean, and culturally, Japanese tend not to open up unless they're drunk. And the conversations that I remember having with people, seeing them do martial arts and then go drinking, it was a completely different person, because of the questions that they would ask me is like, okay, did I hear that right? Is my Japanese correct in thinking that he just asked me that question? And getting used to it, like over time, which, it was pretty wild.
So listen, I'm curious to know that what was the timeline to the black belt in Kendo?
So in Kendo, it's pretty quick, to be perfectly honest. The other thing, I guess, would, you have to take into consideration, I was also practicing twice a day. So, I lived with my instructor. I had the opportunities to train again with some very high level people, also the Jietai, as well as the police officers in Niigata. I think I actually within a year received my black belt, but it's different. I don't know how it is now, to be perfectly honest, but when I went through, my instructor also wanted me to have a black belt in Iaido at the same time. That was very important to him. And so we would practice Kendo along with Iaido. And for maybe those who don't know Iaido, the art of drawing the sword. And so I remember I had the opportunity once to hold an actual real live katana. Scared the shit out of me just holding this thing. I didn't use it, draw it, or anything, like literally just held it. And I was like, I'm good to go here. I'm going to give it back. But that was a big thing with my instructor. He said, if you want to do Kendo, you also need to know Iaido. And so at the same time, I actually went up and received my black belt in Iaido.
In Iaido as well. So it's interesting, the parallel with Kung Fu when you're practicing something like Bagua, and then they do introduce swords as a companion and/or it's certain dojos with like a hierarchy to the like a hierarchical progress to Bagua or Tai Chi Chuan, right? Or push hands, or and I think that's so. Another question. I'd like to diverge a little bit to the senpai kohai culture. So again, for those people listening out there, senpai kohai would translate to mentor mentee, or apprentice and master, and it can wear the senpais and kohais. So kohai meaning apprentice and senpai meaning master, or how I just explained it otherwise. It can have many different manifestations in Japan. Something that, that it exists not only, it stems from disciplines like martial arts, I believe. And culturally, if I'm not mistaken, it stems from being rooted in discipline and respect for the teacher. And actually from the concept ShuHaRi. So I'm sure
ShuHaRi, exactly right.
So which pertains to, starting as a student, developing your skills, respecting the lineage, doing as your teacher would tell you to do, and then eventually just breaking free and letting go of all, and developing your own thing. But the senpai kohai thing from the perspective, and we're talking about 90s now, and it'd be a little bit different to now. It's like I've had my own experience, other people have had their own experiences, but going through culture in Japan, particularly when practicing martial arts, when showing up at a dojo, and I think it's maybe more, I don't know so much about Aikido or Kendo or archery specifically, but when you show up at for example, karate dojo, what you do initially in your training is you don't actually practice that much. You just clean the toilets and do other stuff. So I'm just wondering, in that way, when you showed up in Japan and started, diving into martial arts, were you just a lucky gaijin and you bypassed all that shit, or did you have to clean the toilets? And
exactly what you said. Sorry to interrupt, but I was a lucky bastard. Basically, is what it is.
Were there jealous people around?
Yes, there were, but they understood though that I'm not the kind of person who just, thinks, oh, I'm lucky, I'm not going to do anything. I worked my ass off, and they saw that. And so that was really when things basically opened up. And that's like, for example, when my instructor was like, wow, you're very serious and diligent and disciplined. How about you come and stay with me? It wasn't just like all of a sudden, oh, a fun foreigner as a pet sort of thing. the other thing was the fact that I was extremely dedicated to learning Japanese, and not just learning Japanese, but for example, learning how to use Japanese in the way that it was intended. So it wasn't just, I'm not going to use like, for example, like you might know a little bit of Japanese and just think you can get by with it. But I was really, okay, when it comes to this person, how should I, speak to this person, but not only just the words, but in what way, and trying to be respectful for that. Especially when it came to Kendo, because like I mentioned, I was surrounded by people where, although I didn't really understand at the time who they were because it was all new for me, I could tell like, okay, this person is pretty important in this world, like, and I've never been one to kiss ass. I'm just being respectful. And I think that's what my instructor really saw, because there were other foreigners who were doing Kendo before me as well. I was the first one to get black belt in that area as a foreigner. So that's one thing I can say that I'm pretty proud of, that there were quite a few foreigners before me that had gone to this club in Niigata that had done Kendo. I was the first foreigner of this group to receive black belt. And I didn't know it at the time until much later, but I think a big part of that was not only doing the work, but also being in the right time in the right place.
And were you
or in the right place at the right time? Pardon me. Yeah.
Would it be correct to assume that maybe you were speaking better Japanese than those foreigners, or you were more integrated?
Absolutely. That is it. And yeah. So this was also one thing about myself, is that even though in the exchange program there were other foreigners, my Japanese at that time was actually the highest of anyone in there. And the other people were actually all placed in a separate class. I was in a class by myself. Like literally, I had private lessons when I would go to learn Japanese, because my Japanese was already high enough to be able to communicate. Which, by the way, side note, my instructor was the worst instructor I'd ever had in my life for Japanese. It was her first time teaching Japanese. And what they did is they just needed to find someone to be with me, because the person who was the Japanese teacher was teaching that other class, because they just thought everyone was going over as beginners and things like that. And then I showed up and my Japanese is a higher level. So they needed to find somebody to work with me. And the person that they chose did not want to do it. And we did not get along at all. And so we talked and decided that I was only going to go once a week and check in, because it's a college thing. I had to go at least to that class. I went to other classes, but with her class, and all of my education in terms of Japanese was with my instructor's family, him, me doing Kendo, and all the stuff outside of that. And I always taking notes. Like someone would say something I didn't understand, I would jot down that thing. I would go and I'd look it up, and I wanted to know. And the people around me saw that, and they knew that I was really serious about this. So they really let me into their world. Yeah. So
what about the nuances? Like, I mean, we both know that when you go to Japan, it's not just about the mastery of grammar, verbs, and vocabulary. Right. It's the nonverbal communication, the ability to sense sense a situation and determine whether it's going to be appropriate to communicate something or to not communicate. So what in the process of learning Japanese, and again, this is really all interwoven with a lot of philosophy and martial arts too, and like sensitivity, perspective, it can be complex is a really good way to describe it. So it can be very easy, very complex, one way or the other. So when you were learning Japanese, and you say you were proficient and fluent in Japanese, were you taking notes on cultural nuances? I mean, were you sort of noting that there's something that I just noticed that was weird? Like there was like something maybe that related to the concept of tatemai, like was somebody like like saying something to somebody to sort of patronize them and make them feel good, but deep down you felt as a foreigner looking at that the person was actually saying something nice and being gentle was actually the intention behind that, or something, the feeling, the kimochi deep down inside that was that, this guy's a fucking asshole, right? Or whatever, and it's just like, we know how it is. So, and that's one example of indirect communication, and it's such an interesting thing to try and master. So to what extent, I wanted to ask this, it's an interesting question. I want to pull it out of you because I love meeting fellow friends that have been in Japan for over 20 years and as expats, and we're exposed to a lot of interesting stuff as foreigners, and we're always a little bit on the periphery as a foreigner, but at the same time, the more you get into it, the more you get into the nuances, and it becomes very interesting. So for martial arts, and that's where the interesting thing is for me, martial arts philosophically, in terms of sensitivity, progress, serving your master, serving your fellow comrades in the practice, and then outside the practice, communicating to that. To what extent were you actually integrating that, the ability to communicate both verbally, non-verbally, to blend into a situation, not blend, or to adhere to, or but then also adhere to a situation in terms of communication and development of not only your skill, but the practice, your understanding of the culture as a foreigner, right? Because you're gaikokujin, you're white, right? You're not Asian, and there's always that thing that's there, and and no matter how well you can speak the language, and it's always the element of that there. So what was it? Were you always transliterating, or were you thinking, okay, here's an opportunity for me to sort of adopt this element of my martial arts practice and lay it over the top of the communication dynamic with your Japanese teacher, for example? You agreed to go to her class 1 day a week. I'm interested to know, how did that conversation develop, or how did that agreement develop? I mean, those things like that. I'm sensing that you probably had your fair share of contemplation around this topic. So if you've resonated so far with any of the topics discussed, please consider sharing it with others and clicking the like button. This is really going to help more people find it and support all the efforts that go into this production. Your being here to check out this episode today is a massive contribution toward the sharing of ideas that unfold in these talks, and thank you very much for your support. And subscribe to get real-time notifications about all upcoming episodes.
I have. Again, going back a little further and looking at, as I mentioned, my original Aikido instructor, having spent so much time in Japan, the way that he ran the dojo in Wichita was exactly how they did it in Japan. I remember there was a paramedic that came, really neat guy, but I always remember he would come and he would always take his shirt off in the dojo. And my instructor, every single time, no, we don't do that. That's what the changing rooms are for, and little things like that I just remembered, don't walk on the edges of the mats, or, another thing, when there's a sword, a katana, or whatever that's on the ground, never step over it, okay? Or never step in front of a person when they have their katana in front of them. Never walk in front of a person if they're sitting in seiza. Little things that I understood later were a culture thing, more so, and not just martial art, if you will, that came about later. The other thing too was I had that fabulous Japanese instructor at Kansas State University, Mizuno Sensei, who really taught me a lot about the culture. But I loved about her was she said the only way to do anything is to actually experience it. So that's why you actually have to go and just make mistakes. And so I had that, okay, if you will, to be able to go and do that. Now, when I was in Niigata though, I basically just said, okay, the only way that I'm going to be able to improve my Japanese, get really good at martial art, is if I just get rid of what I was, if you will, and just basically had to become a new person. I don't think that was actually, in the long run, that mentally kind of fucked me up down the road. But in the time, though, it allowed me to get really good at a lot of different things and experience the culture on a level that I gotta say I didn't see too many other foreigners do. And I was constantly in a state of, how is that person doing it? So interesting thing was looking at my instructor. It was cool because I had so much respect for him, but I remember the day where I was like, okay, he's just a fucking dude too. He's just a person. And I remember that was a big change for me because that allowed me to then finally realize, okay, use him as a template, if you will, but then, do what he's doing, but then understand that I eventually need to find my own style. And he would talk about this too all the time, but he said,
hence the ShuHaRi concept.
Exactly. And it's just like learning a language as well. If you think about it, it's martial art. It's anything you learn is you first find a person that you want to mimic, right? And you're like, okay, I want you using this person as my template, if you will. And you try the mannerisms, their speech patterns, intonation, that's what I did. That is what I did. And I would just monitor and then practice and then do that and do that and do that to the point where those things became natural. Then I was able to go deeper into those things and finally change them in order to start to make them my own. So then just like language, you learn set phrases. Those phrases then become very natural. Then what you do is you find other patterns that fit more closely to your character. And that's all I was doing, and this was a process especially when I was in Niigata, that changed, and I had to do it kind of from scratch once I came to Osaka because it was a completely different environment. But again, I was lucky in the sense that the people around me, even though there were foreigners, they weren't where I was because none of the other foreigners were doing the things that I was doing. They didn't want to. Why would you want to do that hard stuff? Why don't you stay here and just drink and party and, just have fun? And
well, particularly, I'd just like to add a note there, Ryan. I mean, we're talking about the 90s in Japan. And everybody's got to know, this is something that we speak as being experienced. The 90s in Japan post-bubble were very decadent. So you're practicing martial arts, waking up at 5 a.m. going to the dojo, but the majority of foreigners that were going through Japan at that time, whether they're expats
just coming
teaching
home.
English, just coming home, exactly,
right,
exiting the clubs, showing passing out in bed and then sleeping all day. And I mean it was very decadent through the 90s, even through the first part of the 2000s. But you somehow seem to bypass that whole thing. And I mean, it was also by that time, I think so Niigata. The decadence may have been there, but more within the Japanese realm of the drinking after the the discipline thing. But in Osaka and Tokyo, there would have been full on partying.
Man. And I think that's how it would have been with me as well. And me saying I was lucky, the sheer fact that I was in the Inaka, right?
Inaka, by the way, is awesome. Countryside.
Countryside, right? I was in the mountains, and so I remember going to Niigata City, by myself with a friend to go to a club once the entire time I was there.
My band played in Niigata.
Oh, did they? Cool.
Yeah, we played in Niigata a couple times at a live house.
That's crazy, man. Yeah. That's so funny.
But
that was just the thing, though. I just didn't do that. And, the other thing, of course, I didn't have a car. It's far away and, whatever. But it was I was really enjoying what I was doing when I was there. Jesus. I loved it. I was like, I'm good, Why would I want to do this, The other thing too was funny, little things opened up other doors. So in the university, when I was there was a guy, a businessman who lived in Shibatashi, who wanted to practice his English. And so I remember the director of whatever that in the university was there, they came to me and said, hey, Ryan, listen, there's this guy. And he's on the up and up. It's all good, but he just wants to practice his English. Would you be willing to go out? He'll take you to dinner and go drinking and stuff on a Thursday night. And he said, they'll probably pay you a little extra money if you want. I said, would you be willing to do that? I was like, all right, sure. I talked to my Kendo instructor and he was like, yeah, that sounds cool. You should do it. So I did it. Super neat guy. I remember he brought his friend. I didn't know who the hell this guy was at the time, but he was the president of a company called Decadence, which is the wig and the hair implant company, which is one of the largest here in Japan. His daughter turned out was in one of my classes, Japanese girl, right? So she was in one of my classes and I didn't really know her at the time, but thanks to the fact of, other people saying, okay, Ryan is a foreigner that is on the open up. You can trust the dude. He also speaks Japanese. He's not going to do anything stupid. He's the guy to talk to for this particular business person. Well, that president of Autonomy actually offered me a job when I graduated Niigata, just for the sheer fact that I wasn't a douche, which I thought was kind of cool. And so, what I mean is all of this played into part of that. And it, still to this day, there are people from Niigata that I'm still in contact with, which is cool. So, yeah.
So so I haven't seen, I don't see any tattoos. You don't have any tattoos?
I actually do. And so this is the other thing that I call it my haji, because my I don't even know how you'd say that in English, kind of like my embarrassing point or something, right? When I was 18, my first year at Kansas State University, buddies and I, we went and got tattooed. I've got it on the left side on my back, on my lower back, down by my hip. And it's very small. It's in English, what do you call it? Yin and yang. Mm-hmm. And it's not filled in, though. It's not filled in because I'm not complete. Okay. I'm still searching, right? But at the time. So I got this not knowing anything about Japan, of course, at the time or whatnot. But once I went to Niigata and my instructor saw that, there was the discussion, why do you have that, blah, blah, and everything like that. Are you going to get more? And then I realized, okay, by having tattoos, I realized that in my case, it would have actually held me back to be able to have certain experiences. And there was a time where I was thinking about getting rid of it. I didn't, because that's a part of me. And I think it's important to still keep that. But even to this day, I mean, I'm sure have trouble going into onsen. I have to cover this thing if I want to go into the onsen with my family. But luckily, what I'm trying to say is that it's small enough that at the time I was able to cover it, which allowed me, to go into the bathhouses in Niigata, to go into other places and do those things where some of my friends who do have tattoos can't. So, yeah. Yeah.
So just as a context for people out there watching, listening, that, tattooing is very taboo in Japan. It's most often connotated with the Japanese mafia. And although historically it's not exclusive to the mafia, it's definitely got its negative connotations because of that. And in the martial arts world specifically, and I can tell you about an experience recently. I've had tons of experiences. So you mentioned going to onsen. I managed to be able to go to a fair few onsens with tattoos, particularly in the 90s. I found it got much more conservative, like after about 2003. Yeah. So I mean, I was going to a 50-meter public pool in Tokyo in the neighborhood which I lived, Nakameguro, for 6-7 years, outdoor pool. And then all of a sudden, one day they had these big banners and security guards, and you no longer could go into that pool with tattoos. Right. Yeah. And later, I went to look into studying archery at Meiji Jingu the Meiji Jingu dojo in the back of the dojo Shrine, Tokyo. And I knew I shouldn't show the tattoos, but when I walked in, and it was the winter, I had a jacket on and everything was covered. I was just thinking, I can't get away with, like. I was practicing at a Kung Fu studio, Tai Chi Chuan, and they just said cover up, and it's cool. That was recent. But the woman that I had to make an appointment to go there for a setsumekai, which is like an information session at the dojo, and I was taking, I had to sign a paper at the front, take it in, and on the paper it said, they handed me the paper. On the paper it says, sign this. On the paper it said, I do not have tattoos. If I have tattoos, I must leave right now. And she asked me, said, do you have tattoos? And I said, well, yes, I do. And she's going, Muri. Yeah. Kaite. She's like, crazy. Leave. So, I mean, and I thought, unfortunately, I really wanted to study archery. And I mean, I think that there are places in Japan you can study archery with monks. Definitely. Yes. Because I think in some Buddhist traditions specifically, or at temples where you could, or where they're offering archery classes, they may be not so specific, but that particular dojo has a historical significance in Tokyo. And I mean, the great teachers. And even though I was supposed to meet the teacher for the Setsumeikai, and he seemed very interested to meet me. He was like, he saw me. He was like in the distance. And he was like, oh, I could speak Japanese too. And he's like, oh, hi, gozaimasu, And he was like really happy to sort of see me come in. But then the woman said, she was actually very rude. She said,
the gatekeeper,
Muri,
right? Yeah.
Kaite kudasai. Like just no, sorry, leave, get out.
Yeah.
And I wasn't showing any of my tattoos. So I said, okay, I understand. I left. And in martial arts specifically, and I can't say for all martial arts the same thing. Like when in certain karate dojos, there'd be people covered in tattoos. At least that's my experience in Tokyo, maybe similar in Osaka.
Yes.
And in other newer sort of iterations of martial arts, for example, like Thai kickboxing or something where that became really popular.
Absolutely.
A lot of tattooed people in Thai kickboxing, also competing. And I think now in martial arts too, depending on the dojo, you can also have tattoos. But what you said is, so that significance is like your teacher said, hey, what's that? And what are you doing? And can you...
And he was cool with it. He was completely cool with it. Yeah.
Maybe again, but this is just this thing because you showed such dedication.
I think that's what it is. Yeah. And it's let's just be honest. Everyone will look at our skin and judge no matter what. Even if they think they're not, they're going to judge. And we all do it to each other, And I'm not just talking about in Japan. I mean, it doesn't matter. If you're of a different race, color, right away, you're going to have this preconceived notion in your mind.
Even better yet, an ideological belief nowadays.
Exactly, right? Which is like, crazy if you think about it, because kids don't have that. Whole other topic. But in Japan, especially, okay, here's a story. So I had another friend. His name is Chris. This is the coolest guy. He was jacked too, I remember. And this is relevant because it has to do with the story. So he's a black dude. He was from University of Illinois. He was also an exchange student there. So the exchange students, they would go over. It was only for a semester, but again, I was there for a few semesters. So I would see multiple groups of people come through, foreigners. So Chris was actually in the first group that went through. And I remember people, especially in Niigata, looking at him and being like, oh my God. Like right away, you could see like this fear in their eye. But this is like one of the sweetest, nicest guys you could ever meet. But he was jacked. Okay. And that was the thing. Yeah, just huge. Right. And I remember that he always wanted to go work out, which is cool, of course. And there was a gym. And I remember going to the gym with him. I'm not a big guy. He is though. And he would start, doing his thing and people would leave because they got scared because he was lifting weights. And it was just one of those things too, where in Tokyo or maybe Osaka is different, but the sheer fact that we were in the countryside in the mountains and, these two foreigners right away, like Japanese were like, I'm getting out of here. It was just crazy to me. But that was a good experience for me as well, because that's when I really was like, wow, this country is racist. Okay. But I'm not going to compare it to the United States, of course, but what I mean in a way where it's been so closed off for so long that they don't realize that they have that way of thinking, and whatever,
And this is an interesting thing to the racist topic, because when coming from a Western mindset, when we think of racism, and again, it's depending on our belief system, the ideological belief system that follows that, it's very polarizing these days. I mean, like, yes, we can, people can be considered racist for saying something that they don't think is racist, but because of the connotations to it right now, we don't. So, like, I had a conversation with a good friend the other day, and I mentioned like my mom's being cared for here in a nursing home, and okay. There's all staff from all different countries, from African countries, from the Philippines. Yeah. And I was just making a comment about my experience in Japan for so many years, knowing so many Filipinos, and and having great friends as well, and then also meeting these Filipinos that were actually care home staff of the place too. And I was just saying that they're very conscientious. I was just saying that these Filipino staff are very conscientious, and I was told by my friend's friend, and she brought it up very politely. She said, that's racist, and I said, well, I suppose it is, but the intention isn't necessarily stemming from racism. When you talk about I'm not thinking, geez, all Filipinos are nice and they can do a good job. I mean, that wasn't the motive. Like, there was Filipinos, there were Africans, there were South Americans. Like, I was just like, out of all those people, they were all very nice. But of all these people, particularly, I thought that the Filipinos were very conscientious with my mother. Right. So that was something, a comment that I'd made that I felt like it was just worth saying. And in Japan, it's a similar thing. Like, Japanese will make comments about people of color, or people that have tattoos, or people that from other Asian countries. And it's not necessarily that they're thinking about being racist in the comments that they make, but the reality is that like you say, it's been closed off for so long. It's so normal for people to make those associations and references, whereby if some people were really racist and xenophobic towards those towards people from other cultures or countries, it wasn't necessarily transferring across to everybody, despite what they're saying. Gai kokujin. I mean, like, the word foreigner is actually quite racist, like in Japan.
Person from another land, right? Yeah,
outsider,
exactly.
Outside of our realm. And I thought that was particularly, it's interesting. We have to let it go, because we can shout and scream, fucking racism, till the cows come home. Or we can, we can start to understand that this is deep rooted. It's been there for a very long time. Things change as the times change, but in Japan, it won't really change like over, over the long term. How long will it last before, we know this. So that topic of, like standing out and it hitting home with you, like, wow, okay, I am a foreigner, and people do perceive people of color this way. And for example, I'd be the same thing. I walk into a fitness club with my tattoos, and before you know it, like, people would walk away. I'd have the bench press to myself, right? So I mean, in a way, I kind of liked it, because I just walk in with a tank top on, and I don't have that much time, I want to get my 3 sets in, and they leave, right? So, but I mean, and
that was something too. Yeah, I'm sorry, I interrupted. Yeah, it reminds me of when way back when. And this was in Niigata. There were 2 incidents, which I thought were pretty funny, that reminded me of this. I remember getting on the train, and I remember a little girl with her mother turning and looking at me, and turning to her mother and saying, "Why is there a foreigner here?" Not, look, there's a foreigner, but why is there a foreigner here? And it I kind of laughed. And I think the mother then realized that I understood Japanese, and we ended up talking. But, the other thing I remember is getting on a train and me sitting down and the people beside me moving. And I was like, okay, at first I was like, what the fuck? But then I was kind of like, well, actually, this is nice. I have this to myself now. You know what I mean? So
I'll tell you my own story with that. My mother, the first time she visited Japan was, I believe, in 1993, and we were doing very touristy things. We were like sort of going to the Tokyo Imperial Palace. My mother was very tired, so and I said, okay, just, hold on, I took off my jacket, and like I sat down, and like I went over to a bench and sat down. Everybody got up and left, and I said, "Come on, Mom, sit down." She was like laughing. She was like,
"There you go."
Well, how did you do that? It was just like, "Well, Mom, I have
magic,
tattoos."
right? It's magic, exactly.
So I mean, it's a bit sort of naughty. But at the same time, you say it's a little bit disturbing in a sense, because you think, wow, I'm being really judged somehow. Yeah,
like right.
Then I got the whole seat to myself. Yeah, I think, So I just want to, before I want to sort of start to move towards chatting a bit about GMB, because I've known GMB.
I would love to talk about GMB. Yes,
I've known about GMB since 2014. But before we go to GMB, I just, like, you've practiced a lot of different martial arts. Where did karate and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and so I know where Judo fell into it, because you say you started to practice Judo when you went to college, and I mean, perhaps that would have been the initiation into any kind of wrestling specific type of martial arts, like BJJ or whatever. But I mean, let's just say, where did BJJ and karate come in? I'm sure they came in at very different times.
Yes, they did. So after I graduated from Niigata and Kansas State University, then I thought I wanted to work in Niigata, but to be perfectly honest, there was no jobs. And so I had to go back to Kansas State University because it was an exchange program. And so, you do your thing and then you go back and you have to complete one more semester, which was hell for me, by the way. I was just like, because I wanted to go back to Japan. During that time, though, I realized that there were no jobs in Niigata. There was I don't remember what it was called, but basically there was like the Japan recruiting conference or something. It was held in Boston. And basically what you did was, you created tons of resumes in Japanese. You go to this career day. I don't know what it's called, but basically there's just a bunch of companies from Japan that are looking for bilingual people who are also skilled in other things. And I went and interviewed with a few companies, and this company pulled me up. Anyway, so I ended up moving back to Osaka, and I worked for that company for a year. And during that time, I continued to do a little bit of Kendo, but the actual work I did was hell. It was hell. Hated it. A suit every day. It just wasn't me. So after that, though, I ended up getting hired at Sumiyoshi Taisha, which is a shrine, because they had a martial arts complex within the shrine. And I ended up working at that martial arts complex for 8 years. Some of the best years I've had here in Osaka in terms of work-wise. I loved it. And there were so many fabulous martial art instructors. And I got the opportunity to go to all the classes. And so I would, for example, of course, I was still doing Judo. Judo was my main thing at that time. And so I was doing Judo not only there, but I was also doing Judo I was on the police team, of course, civilian, but I was at the police hall here in Osaka, and I was on their team doing it. And I also got to train at Osaka Castle, which is Shudokan, which is super cool. So, but then I would also do, for example, Shorinji Kempo, Daitoryu Aikido Jiu-Jitsu. I remember doing Kyudo. They had Iaido and stuff. So I had the opportunity over, those 8 years to be able to do those martial arts. So my boss at the time, who ran the martial arts complex, he said, "Hey, you got to quit. You got to do your own thing." And I was like, "Okay." So I stopped, and I ended up starting my own company. And then I just continued with Judo, and I was doing Judo, and then that's when I had my injury in Judo. So blew my shoulder out, had reconstructive surgery on my shoulder. And I was done competing, basically. I was competing like all the time, just all the time. It was just too much, but I loved it. Blew my shoulder out, and I still wanted to do martial arts. And so I actually started doing Shorinji Kempo because that was something that I had done when I was at the martial arts complex, and found a wonderful instructor that also was just really good to me and knew my situation and my background with other martial arts. And so he was very open to me training with him and also incorporating some of my throws and things when we would spar, which was very cool. And so I ended up going all the way up to Sandan, 3rd degree black belt in Shorinji Kempo with that. Politics got in the way, and my instructor there said, "Hey, Ryan, you should quit because the politics are going to get really messy here in Shorinji Kempo." That's when I went into actually Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I've always loved grappling, my Judo and everything like that. And so now really all I do is just Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and have a lovely group that I'm a part of.
How many
it's
years?
Very open. Yes. So Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is actually not that long. I don't know if we can count COVID, because during COVID I had to, we all kind of had to take a year off. But in total, I would say maybe 5-6 years in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
So relatively short period compared to all the other martial arts.
Comparatively, yes, exactly.
So can I have an understanding? How long were you committed to Judo?
Yeah, Judo I did that the longest. And so
20 years.
I would say under 20 years, but yeah, for quite a while. And some fabulous experiences. I got my ass thrown by some pretty cool people, and I was never great at Judo or anything. I just enjoyed it. And again, another situation where when I would train at the Shudokan, the Osaka castle. You have to be a black belt in order to train there for this open class. I was the only white boy there, and there's just so many people that would train there. And I remember going in there, and I would kind of dread it because I was just like, oh my God, this is going to be rough.
You're gonna get
but
your
I would
ass
go.
kicked.
I just got my ass kicked like every single time. They would just wipe the floor with me, but it was cool. And, they got used to seeing me. So there was like, especially a lot of the police officers, it'd be like, hey, come over here. And then bah, 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 and do that. So it was pretty cool. I will say the most, I wouldn't say brutal, but the coolest judo bout that I think I've ever seen wasn't at, for example, the judo championships or anything like that. It was between a police officer and a yakuza at the Shudokan. And, they went at it. And it was cool because everybody kind of knew that they were kind of, going at it. And
but
they
the
were really good. Yeah.
Shudokan allowed, I mean, obviously, I think there was some association there, right? So was it okay for gangsters to go in?
Yeah, but it's one of those things where, don't tell, don't mention
Don't talk
kind
about
of thing. Yeah, it was one of those things. I don't know how it is now. This was, quite a few years ago, but I just remember that was just fucking awesome. Yeah, I was just like,
I'm really curious about that. So the police officer and Yakuza were sparring.
Well, they're just sparring. They're just sparring.
They were going at it.
Yeah.
Was there any kind of a sense of like animosity, or was it more just like technique? They were both had really good technique, and they were going.
It was just really good technique, and they did not want to lose. And it's like that. And so this is how it always was with me in judo as well. Judo comes from Japan. Whenever I would step on the mat, there was no light sparring with me because heaven forbid a foreigner throws you, I mean, the Japanese did not want to lose even when we were like in practice. It's their thing. And so that was kind of what it was with this police officer.
It's really strong pride. Isn't it?
It's pride. Yeah. But it was great because, again, like I got really good because these guys were really going after me. I got injured all the time, of course. That's not a cool thing. But hey, the adversity, I wouldn't change it. It was great. It was great.
The adversity shapes a skill set for sure. I mean, and that I totally get that. So listen, I've known of GMB, I think, since 2014. I mean, I want to dig into it a little bit here because for those people who don't know GMB, for one, I'm going to ask you to explain it in a second, but explain what GMB is and how it started. But my initial impression of GMB came at a time when, I'd already been sort of delving in a lot of interdisciplinary practice, that stemmed from all the years experience that I had in practicing yoga and doing martial arts and just intuitively exploring a lot of other movement specific practices on my own, borrowing from, the areas that sort of coined themselves as functional fitness, holistic fitness, whatever, and then how that transferred. And then I saw GMB and a lot of the references. And I was at that time, I think I told you in our email correspondence that some of we were conducting teacher training courses in Japan. Some of our teacher trainees were, interested in ways to try and stimulate like a faster strength and flexibility progress in what they were doing with in yoga. And I was like, look, there's for one, I mean, to really, and you'd agree with me in this in martial arts too, and I can attribute the same thing to yoga, is like to really progress, you have to bake it in. So there's two things. There's no shortcut. There's no shortcut, but what I saw, and I couldn't refer them to too many different things, but I couldn't say go off and go to the gym and hire a personal trainer, because that wouldn't have been feeding the purpose. That would be just like focusing too much on whatever a fitness routine would be focusing on. Nor could I tell them to do martial arts, because there would be, like specifically it was contact martial arts. It'd be a lot of like getting the ass kicked. But both fitness and martial arts would definitely complement, and they have complemented my progress in not only yoga, but various other different things. And I came across GMB Fitness randomly, and I thought, well, look, there's this, online
weird
practice.
Guy doing.
Weird guy. I mean, I would say weird guys doing this kind of interesting cross-disciplinary movement practice specific, and I was referring all our students like, look, I think that this is interesting because they're focusing on quality and variability of movement and how that, stimulates outcome across a variety of different circumstances, depending on a person's adeptness in whatever they're doing. And I'd like you to explain GMB in a second, because from what I see, particularly a lot of the GMB from that time until now, what I'm seeing GMB is that it's very community focused. You guys are, not very much so. It's not super sensational. Like there are videos of you on Instagram doing really cool stuff, but it's not about you get your students to post shit on Instagram and post their progressions, and basically it's everybody with every body type. And every kind of limitation you can imagine, going through your programming and building some sort of skill set where they feel empowered by the experience that you can really see that in the people that are doing that. So, that really intrigued me. And I thought, well, that's a really healthy, complement to what I could recommend our students to do so what I want to know is, and could you please explain to people, I just kind of gave a bit of it away, because where did GMB incubate? And for what reason did it incubate? Absolutely.
So first off, thank you very much. Very happy to hear that. Lots to unpack there, what you just asked me. First off, GMB is completely different from what it originally was, but it is the same in the sense that it's not about me. It's not about my business partner, Andy, nor is it about my business partner, Jarlo Ilano. It's about how can we help others do the things that they want to be able to do in their life, because it's not about doing more exercise. It's about having the physical autonomy to know exactly where you are in your body so that you can do more of the things you love. Again, not more exercise, more of the activities that you love. And so in the sense that things have changed from how we now present programs, how we present thoughts, concepts, more refined. We've gone deeper into the method now and really, nailed that down, if you will, compared to back when we first started. A lot of the things that we talk about now were very difficult to talk about. We originally released our first program was Rings 1. And during that time, as a matter of fact, my business partner and I, just yesterday, we were discussing this and shooting some videos about this. And if we were to have presented Rings 1 using the method that we have now, it wouldn't have gelled with that community because they weren't ready for that at that time. And so basically at that time when you were looking at training, it was how many sets, how many reps, and basically like, is this going to build muscle or not? Whereas with us, we're about building skills. And rather than saying, okay, I don't care how many repetitions you can do. I want you to do this one time as beautifully as possible, bringing as much awareness into the movement as you can for the purpose of you being a little bit better and just simply having an understanding of that movement. It's not about nailing a movement or crushing it or whatever the new
terminology
term is they want to use out there. It's why are you doing this? How does this serve you? And so when you mention, okay, it's about community, hell yeah, it's about community, because again, I am the dancing monkey, if you will, in the sense that I'm demonstrating these movements and showing them. But again, it doesn't serve anyone for me to have my shirt off, doing all these flashy skills, saying, look at me. Since the most important thing is, okay, these are simply examples for you to be able to use in order to, better yourself. And that's all really we're after, is how can this help you? And so that's why we're really looking at not taking my shirt off. I mean, I know that sounds funny, or me demonstrating when I'm wearing jeans. A lot of people are just like, oh my God, I can't believe you're wearing jeans. I'm like, well, that's because you have this preconceived notion that when you exercise, you have to change your outfit and you have to, do certain. No, we're doing this stuff for life, for the things we want. We're all different. So how can you take this and apply it to what you need? And so I talked a little bit about the method, but we're looking at building strength, flexibility, and control, which is something that a lot of places don't talk about. But the kind of strength that we're after is not how much you can bench, but the kind of strength where, how do you need it in your life? Do you need it to be able to, better pop up on your surfboard to catch your wave? Do you need better strength to be able to play with your kids? It's very specific depending upon that person. And that's why we can't say, okay, here's the GMB standard that you need to be able to do. And you're a bad person if you can't do this. You'll never hear that from us. It's always, okay, how does it serve you? Again, it just really comes down to that. So we've got the strength, flexibility, and control. And then what we use is our AAA framework, where we assess where you're at and we give you tools to be able to see where you are. Then we address what you need. Okay. There might be, for example, I mentioned strength, but it could be maybe you're lacking in terms of range of motion in a particular position. Okay, cool. Let's address that. And then we apply the protocol in order to help you to be able to do it. Basically, you do the work. And that can also be dependent upon where you are in your life. It doesn't mean you're going to work out for 1 hour every single day and you're going to XXX. No, it depends upon your lifestyle. What can you do? And simply step on the mat and be able to start with a little bit of progress in order to get where you want to go. It could be 15 minutes, it could be 30, it could be whatever it is. But the important thing is having these tools to understand that this is where you start and we're all different and you're perfectly fine not being able to do this thing. And if you would be able to do it, then you probably wouldn't be here with us. So, hey, understand that you're going to suck in the beginning. Embrace the fact that you will suck, and take that weight off your back and just simply try and trust in the process and enjoy it a little bit for the activities you want to do. And then we also now, of course, have in our method the actual way that we go through a session. We don't really call it a workout, if you will, a session. And we're always looking at the practice portion of this. And this is really coming back to the martial arts side of Andy, Jarlo, and I, because we're all martial artists. Jarlo with his Filipino martial arts. He's also a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Andy's a 6th degree black belt in Taido. And so we all have this extensive background in martial art. Our programs are not specifically for martial arts, but people would benefit from using our programs in order to help them with their strength, flexibility, and control. But the way that we have it laid out is, again, we're looking at practicing movements. And so we start with a prep. So what are the things that you need to do in order to help you to quickly get into the practice portion of your session? You're not going to spend 30 minutes just like foam rolling and doing all this stuff. Like, what are the joints, the major joints, and what do you need to do in order to make sure that you're ready to start practicing something? You mentioned Yuval. So for example, one thing, handstands in GMB, if you're interested in learning the handstand, well, you have to practice the handstand. You're not just going to I'm going to do 100 repetitions of the handstand. It doesn't work that way. If it's, for example, a movement on the ground, if you're looking at rolling on the ground, how many reps do you do of that? Well, that's silly. It's not a matter of doing reps. It's how well are you doing that movement? How much understanding are you able to bring into it? Where are you lacking? Where do you need work? And then you practice that. And so what we do is we have a duration of time. And what we say is, okay, let's say 10 minutes. And it doesn't mean you do that movement the entire time at all. It simply means that, again, you try the movement, bringing awareness, then you step away from it, shake things out and think, okay, how'd that go? What do I need to do for this next attempt of this movement? And then you do it. And when your form starts going down, then you understand, okay, I think I'm done practicing. It's time to move on to the next portion of the session. Now, depending on what's going on in that session, you could have a play section. So it's prep, practice, play. And play is not something you hear a lot of people talk about, right? It sounds like you should just be on, the playground, running around with your hula hoop or something like that. But play is where we explore. And this is a lot of times where the aha moments happen and you can really learn more about yourself. But we never explore or play with a movement that is new to us. We always look at a movement that we're already comfortable with, a movement that we practiced, a movement that we can say, okay, I've got a handle on this. And now what we can do is in that play section, say, all right, now I know how to do this movement. What if I were to X? And it could be simply a matter of reframing and saying, okay, rather than moving in a different position, it could be, what if I were to bring more focus to my anterior pelvic tilt when I'm performing this particular movement? Okay, completely random. Okay, I don't, but that can be exploration, just a reframe of how you view that particular movement. It can be also, yes.
Go ahead. No, go.
It could even be, for example, where you're actually taking yourself out of alignment a little bit just to see what happens when you do that. And by kind of expanding that box, if you will, but doing it in a way that's still safe and allowing you to do it, you're expanding everything then, and you're learning more, and you're still bringing more awareness. And so this is really what we're after, is again, going and leading towards that physical autonomy, knowing more about what we can do with our bodies. And maybe even more importantly, what we can't do with our bodies, so that we can start working on shoring up, hate to say, those deficiencies that we have that we might need for the activities in our life that we want to do.
What you said there, it also overlaps, and I guess this has something to do with all of your experience in committing to martial arts, that it also dials back into this Japanese concept, ShuHaRi, where basically the Ri in the ShuHaRi is where you've explored the technique, and there's time to play. It's time to make your own flavor of the experience.
Exactly.
It's time to express that and explore and adventure with it.
Yes.
And that play concept, I think, is really healthy. It's inspiring to hear that that's a strong component of what you're doing. When I first heard about GMB too, I didn't feel like there was a lot of other stuff like it happening at that time.
So this is something else. Again, sorry to interrupt
at
you,
that particular,
at that time, there was no other people like who were doing
online. There wasn't anything.
Yeah, online zero, right? Yeah. And so it was interesting. So during the whole COVID thing, you saw pretty much everybody going online, and great for them. But we've been doing this stuff forever, And so for us, it was just kind of like, okay, you know what I mean? And we were in a good place for that to happen. And I got to say, one thing was not upsetting, but sometimes a little frustrating, because there was a lot of crappy information coming out online. All of a sudden, everybody thought that they were like online gurus and stuff, which was kind of funny. But, coming back to what you're saying, though, again, it's our community is the most important thing, and how can we better help these people? And so, the way that we have these things laid out, we're trying to educate people on seeing that there's a different way. And because we are educators, that's what we are. We're physical education teachers. That's it. It's like, if I'm in an airplane and somebody's like, what kind of work do you do? I'm not going to say, I'm a fitness consultant and try and make myself sound like some guru or something. No, I'm just a PE teacher, to be perfectly honest. I just want to help people to move in a way that they want to move and actually enjoy the process. And so the other thing too is our fourth area, which is push. So we've got prep, practice, play, push. Push is typically where the majority of people live in their workouts. Okay. Because they're like, I'm going to go and hit the weights, or I'm going to crank out 100 push-ups or something. That's the push section. And for us in push, again, we're not performing a movement at the highest level that we can in terms of the most difficult. We're actually bringing things down to a level that's kind of similar to play, in the sense that we know this movement already. Therefore, we can literally push ourselves harder, increase the intensity. And therefore, by doing this, we can do it and still keep good form. That's the most important thing. We keep that form, and we continue to push ourselves in order to improve our strength, our flexibility, and our control, even during push. So many different ways to do this. It can be a matter of literally just getting stronger in a position. It could be looking at improving your strength endurance through the use of adding in jumps, multiple repetition of jumps in order to, expand basically your capabilities of what you're able to do when you do that. And then finish off with ponder. And this is extremely important. And this is where you actually reflect back on how did things go? What did I do well? What could have I done maybe a little better? What do I need next time? And it's basically, for Andy, Jarlo, and I, it's how we practice our martial art as well, And, when we practice, we start off and we prepare our body. And there's a particular technique that we want to practice. And then we get with our partner and we try out some variations of it or something like that. And then we spar. That's the push section of it. And at the very end, we sit and we reflect, And so, again, I'm not saying that our things are like martial art, but because what we're talking about today is the martial arts topic, I think you can see how our influence and things have come from that.
Well, we're seeing, I'm glad to hear all this. It's the first time we've actually had a chance to talk. I could kind of sense it a little bit in a lot of what you're presenting, but our trajectories are very similar. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to talk to you on transmission. So, I'd like to sort of like turn this towards wrapping up our first conversation. I'm hoping that we'll have many more in the future.
I would love that. Yes.
I'd like to turn this toward the ponder a little bit more. So like, and in relation to you yourself. So ponder, it translates to contemplation. So basically, and that's, if I've understood it correctly, and I mean, I've just from my own practice too, it is a huge component of contemplative practice anyway.
Yes.
So we work at something, we challenge, we find a playful element of it, and then we reassess. So the reassessing, I find that that can kind of overlap over a lot of other things that go on in life. And I mean, I know we didn't have a lot of time to talk about it today, but I mean, I know you're a dad, you have kids, and from listening to the conversation that we've had today about the relationships you've had with your Japanese friends, your teachers in Japan, it was obviously I'm guessing there's a lot of elements of that stuff that have been very formative in shaping what you do more from a metaphorical perspective, if you want to say so. Like what influences you as an educator in GMB fitness, so I'd like to just ask what elements of the interpersonal relationships you have, and that could be with your kids, it could be with the past teachers. I mean, what elements of those things, and to leave off, and this may take us some time to talk about, but what elements of those things are integral in your life to this day? And I mean, I'm not just talking about like spending time with people and enjoying it, but like, what are the aspects of the mirroring of these situations with your teachers, with your kids, with your family, with your friends, with your coworkers, with your students that you have all over the world practicing your method? I mean, with a few sort of like conceptual, nuggets, what can you share with us about that integration?
This is fabulous. I've never been asked this before. Fabulous question, but it's actually something I've thought a lot about because I've had to. In terms of relationships, I think that, and this is something that people might see from a distance, but only really the three of us can comprehend. And that's my relationship with Jarlo and Andy, in the sense that we're still together. And let's be honest, it's tough to run a business, even by yourself, but with other people, it can be extremely tough. We're all, 1/3 owners of the company. First started off, we were all just like, hey, let's try this, and it's now what it is, which is crazy. And what I'm getting at, though, is that the only way that we've been able to survive is by reflecting on the other person. And we fought, and disagreed and just so much stuff, but we're still together. Doesn't mean that we're still best friends and everything. No, people grow and they grow apart a little bit. But I think there's also the other aspect of, like I mentioned with my Kendo instructor, that respect, but then also that day when you realize this person is also
Human.
a person. He's a human. He's going to fuck up. I fuck up all the time. For me to think that my shit doesn't stink is wrong, right? And so, especially when we're looking at in a business sense, that there are things that I do that I know Andy and Jarlo are just like, oh my God, again? Seriously? But we're accepting of each other, if you will. And that's, I think, especially now, as we grow older. I'm 49 years old. In October, I'll be 50. And you just, you basically have to reflect and realize that it's not about me. And like I said before, and when I say it's about our community, this isn't just lip service. I mean, literally, it has to be that way, or else it's not going to work. There's a big part of me that's selfish, and I of course I want things out of this, and Andy wants things out of it, and Jarlo. But the thing is if it were only about me, it wouldn't work, is what I'm trying to say. And I think that's the same whether it be, in a marriage, your best friend or anything, and your best friend, and they'll do something just completely fucking stupid, but you're there for them, and you say, man, what are you doing? Because it's out of love, and because you want them to do the same for you. And so I think as we get older, we start actually allowing conversations, if you will, to happen that maybe might not have happened earlier when we were still brash and extremely ego driven. And not that we're not ego driven now, because we all have an ego, right? But it's only human to have that. But I think it's a matter of maybe taking that wall down a little bit and not thinking that you have to be so defensive and making it all about yourself. And so again, I've been really lucky to have some great teachers and see them as real people. And I think that was the biggest thing, was the fact living with your Kendo instructor is so much different than just going and see them when they're doing Kendo and thinking they're a god, right? Actually seeing them sometimes at their worst, for me at least, makes me respect them more, in the sense also understand that I don't have to pretend. And that is, I think, also very important. And in GMB, what you see is what you get. If you go to a video, like, I'm not pretending to be whatever. And I think that we can be real. And I think that's extremely important with GMB in our relationships. Is Jarlo's Jarlo, Andy's Andy, I'm me. And, again, we're open to each other to be able to do that. And we want each other to be that way. So I'm rambling, but yeah, there's so much for me.
Ryan, the rambling's fucking awesome. I mean, I say, so listen, there's a couple of things I'd like to add, sort of add to that. So for one, I mean, love, the definition of love is often not misunderstanding, the perception. I don't want to say misunderstanding. People can perceive things however they want. The perception of love is that we love is perfect. But the reality is that how we measure love really, is altogether dependent on how tolerant or willing one is to forgive. And I mean, and that's something that a lot of people take for granted. I mean, they think that if love isn't perfect, then fuck it. Then we're out and we're going to abandon this shit and we're going to move on to the next person where we can find that perfect iteration of love. And that's, I really like what you were saying, but there's also something I like to add conversely to that. And like we know, because we've been in Japan for so many years as teachers and as practitioners, and you were lucky to have that experience with your teacher and you saw him as a human being and what he was. But tell me that you haven't seen the other side of that. And I don't want to be so controversial about it, but the fucking guru in the master in Asia and
absolutely
a lot of different disciplines, he's put up on the pedestal that he has to uphold. And if he fucks up, and I've experienced it. And I've always been one to deflect that reasoning. I've always been one to wanting to show people that I'm far from being perfect, and I blurt out whatever comes out of my mouth. And in the context of like, if you want to learn from me, you got to learn for one that I'm not perfect. I'm gonna make mistakes, and these mistakes are a reflective tool for you to be able to understand that it's not that I'm better than you. It's just that we're reflecting and different in our approaches to do things. And as a teacher, I can show you tech, but I can also show you the idiosyncrasies of the human experience. And in Asia, and I don't mean to complain about it, but I mean, I had so many students in Japan, and maybe you've had similar, and this GMB is a different story because you have students all over the world, and maybe there's a little bit, like you say, you're showing yourself. But in Japan specifically, teachers are put on a pedestal. The teacher is a fucking god. And you know, like if the teacher makes a mistake, that's fucking it. He's canceled. Right. And that happens sometimes. And, and that's something that I feel, you know, it's really inspiring to hear that you guys are, and it's not that I'm criticizing this. I think that in this concept of ShuHaRi, for example, that we talked about, like the initial parts of that dev are very much focused on listening to what your teacher says, not questioning the teacher. Yeah. And he knows what is right. And I fucking agree with that. I will do only as the teacher tells me to do. I'm not going to start throwing my own opinions onto a teacher when he's trying to teach me something about something he knows better than me. And that way, from the martial arts and yoga practitioner perspective of my experience in the past, I've never questioned or you know, like, or argued with the teacher. But there was a stage in that ShuHaRi process whereby I've learned all that I'm going to learn from this person, and you know, okage-sama de, otsukare-sama desu. Yep, it's like, and then you it's time for you to express yourself and have that iteration. And that what you have dialed into GMB, I think, is a very healthy thing.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm to what you just said. I completely agree. I think there. One thing that actually does bother me sometimes is when, especially in a martial art or whatnot, is when a new student comes in and thinks they know better, having not actually spent the time to see what it's about. And so that's when I think people should just shut the fuck up and just do it. Yeah. Right.
This is more like the Gaijin mindset coming to Japan. I think.
Right. Yeah. You know, and so I've seen so many foreigners, like when I was working at that martial arts complex, because I was there again as like interpreting. And so we would have foreigners come. There's so many times where I was just like, dude, you need to shut the fuck up because you have no clue what you're talking about right now. Okay. And it's tough. I get it that they were only there for a short period of time, and they, rather than drinking from, you know, the drips, they wanted the whole fire hose, you know, of information, but it doesn't work that way. Right. It's, you know, even in GMB, we're not gurus, of course, or anything like that. All we're trying to do is leak out the information in a way that's going to be what we feel good for that person at that time, so they're not overwhelmed, so they can focus on that thing and actually get good, rather than saying, okay, well, that's cool, but I want to be able to do this. Well, okay, I get it, but if you don't do this, you can't do that. So coming back to what you said, shut up, put in the time, just focus on doing this one single thing. Then what's going to happen is that time where, in my case, which has happened every single time, it wasn't me saying, oh, I think I'm ready for my black belt. I've never, hey, I think I'm good, I need my black belt. No, it's not that way. It's, here's your black belt, because you've earned it. And then that's when the real next stage happens, because that's when, in my case, my instructors then go, hey, Ryan, what do you think about this? And things change, where you go actually from that teacher, like knowing all of everything. Not saying that I'm ever going to be equal with them, because they're a sensei, which for those of you listening, sensei uses two characters, which is saki ni umareta, which is the person who was born before. And so just the person born before me simply means that they have more experience in this thing than I do. But you do find a level where if you have a great teacher, they're still going to be looking at things with the mindset of exploration and wanting to learn. And I'm sure you're the same. I learned so much from my students. I teach something and they do something. I'm like, oh, that's pretty fucking cool. I never thought about that. Then you can explore. And so again, it's in ShuHaRi, when you're looking at that, there comes a time where, yes, you might go out on your own. But the thing is that's also a great opportunity for you to be able to have deeper conversations with your instructor if your instructor is open to exploration and continuing to learn and look at things that way. The reason I left Shorinji Kempo is because my instructor was so open to the things I was doing, but the top brass in the organization weren't. And they wanted to just keep it's got to be this way because we're blah. And so that's when he told me, he's like, you need to get out of Shorinji Kempo because it's just becoming political and just stupid. And so, again, lots to unpack there, but, we're looking at culture. We're looking at where that individual is in their life path, their previous experiences. There's so many things coming in there, but I do think that, if I go to one of your classes, I'm not going to show up to one of your classes and you show something and I say, that's wrong. No. Okay. I'm going to learn why you do it that way. Shut the fuck up and do it, to the point where I'm just like, okay, now I get why he's doing it this way. I can't tell you how many times yoga instructors have told me that my plank is incorrect. And I'm just like, okay. That's from the context of what you're doing. I do this for a different purpose.
Yeah,
and
but
so
yoga teachers, they really don't, so I don't mean to be critical of them because I practiced yoga for so many years, but my initial experience of yoga was with a very anarchistic teacher that just was totally anti-system. Yeah. He's from India, but he wasn't a part of any specific lineage, but he was very passionate about what he was doing. That was my introduction. But then I left him and I went into very dogmatic yoga practice for years. And in those dogmatic yoga practices where I met the politics that you're talking about. It's like essentially in a couple of the newer iterations of what became popularized Western yoga, two methods, and specifically Ashtanga Vinyasa and Iyengar yoga. Yeah. There's a lot of politics in both of those. I'm not saying that to be critical because I think that there's a lot of people that benefit and have fantastic practices and have great teachers that have a wealth of knowledge and really, but it just goes the same thing, irrespective of being yoga, irrespective of being martial arts. There's a point, as which your teacher said, and he was so humble to be able to notice that point that you were making, is just like, just nowhere for you to go here because of the politics. So time to move on. And, this is also maybe a bit of a sensibility that I see that also sort of finds its way through. And we didn't talk about that today, but we do have to wrap up. Buddhism. So we didn't talk about Zen Buddhism. We didn't talk about Buddhism in particular, but how much of an influence Buddhism maybe has on the contemplative element of what we're doing with our practices. Absolutely. And, that sensibility, like the monk, the master monk, whatever he's doing in his practice, like, like shugyo, to basically develop his skill. And, like whether that's sitting under a waterfall that's freezing cold in the middle of the winter or walking barefoot up a mountain in the snow. Or just sitting and, meditating for days on end. I mean, there's it's all about stripping away the sense of self. And I mean, we know this is so cliche to talk about this, and we're not going to that extreme, I don't think, in what we're doing. We're not stripping away, as you mentioned, we have things that we want to do them, and this is it. Therefore, we're not Buddhist monks. But that sensibility in Buddhism, anyway, what can teach us to be able to strip away this, like, you know what, I want to do this, I want to do it now, I want to fucking do it better than you. Like, this is what exists in yoga. This is what exists in martial arts. This is what exists in all this movement practices all around the world these days. And I mean, I'm not criticizing that people need to go through that process, but this bringing it down to earth and making it palatable for anybody from any walk of life, and not make it like some sort of like, you know what, in order to do this, you got to do that. And, you're not going to be able to do it because you're not in good shape
or bad person or whatever.
And, I think I'd like to extend on that topic anyway the next time we have a chance to talk, because Buddhism is something that I'd like to discuss, because you have practiced Zen Buddhism, and we've both done probably our fair share of meditation. Yes. But I'd like to continue talking, but we've almost gone 2 hours, I'm guessing by now. And but what I prefer to say is that, look, let's pick it up again.
Sounds great.
This is like a really good, like, I'm really happy we had this talk, and this is like,
I am too.
For everybody out there,
it.
We haven't talked before, and this is our first meeting, and like we're brothers from Japan, but we never met each other. We were both there for 30 years, and
it's crazy,
it is crazy. And I'm hoping that there are many more conversations like this, Ryan. So look, I just want to put, I will put it in the show notes, and but obviously people can find you at.
Just basically go into the interwebs and type in GMB Fitness. We're everywhere. The easiest thing if you want to is gmb.io. And, before you buy anything, go check out our YouTube channel, GMB Fitness. We got tons of videos up there. There's a lot to share there, is it? Tons of videos up there. And you can just basically see my teaching style by watching some of those videos. And then, hey, send us a message too. That's another thing with us. If you send an email, howdy or info@gmb.io, you're always going to get a reply from a real person. So, yeah. And,
I'll also put your Instagram handle here as well. But is there anywhere else that people can find you on social media outside Instagram, or are you focusing predominantly Instagram and the GMB YouTube?
So it's YouTube. We're basically everywhere. We're not on TikTok, but we Instagram,
I've been trying to understand that
Facebook.
Myself recently, but
I'm kind of like whatever. Twitter as well. Yeah, I'm sure there's some other places, but it's basically GMB Fitness. Type it into anything, and we'll pop up.
Okay, I'm going to put all that in the show notes. And listen,
thank you,
Ryan. It was a great honor and pleasure to talk to you today on Baseworks Transmission. Otsukare-sama deshita. And I'm sure there's going to be many more conversations to come. And look, man, thanks again.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you very much for tuning in today. And again, please consider liking and sharing the episode with others if it resonated with you. You can also subscribe and set up notifications anywhere you listen to or watch this to get real-time updates about all future uploads. And please email us a brief voice memo letting us know what inspired you or pushed your buttons to ideas@baseworks.com. To benefit from exclusive content delivered right into your inbox, consider signing up for our newsletter from the footer on any page of our website. To know more about Baseworks specifically and everything we're doing, visit our website at baseworks.com.